Sometimes, danger does not come from the bush path or the market stalls. Sometimes, the greatest danger hides right inside the home, hidden in silence, fed by neglect, waiting to erupt. This is not just a story, it is more of a warning and eye-opener. Welcome back to African Folktales Hub, where we bring you stories that will break your heart, open your eyes, and inspire you to change. If you are new here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us till the end. What you are about to hear will shock you and remind you that parenting is not just about providing food and shelter, it is about watching closely even when you are busy. Now listen carefully. In the city of Owerri, two families lived as neighbors, almost like sisters. Mrs. Amaka, mother of 12-year-old Obinna, was strict and watchful, the kind who demanded discipline before laughter. Beside her lived Mrs. Funk, mother of 12-year-old Adiz, a softer soul who believed love must always be gentle, never harsh. At the market square, they were known as hard-working women who never joked with their stalls, never missed a day at work. Their children, Obinna and Adiz, had grown up like twins. They played together, fetched water for their mothers, shared homework, and even prayed side by side during church fellowships. Their laughter often rolled into the compound like bright music, drawing smiles from other neighbors. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled above the zinc roofs, the two friends found themselves in Obinna's room. Boredom gnawed at them, the kind that comes when rain cancels after-school play. They searched through old boxes, books, and cupboards, giggling at old photographs and forgotten toys. Suddenly, buried at the bottom of a dusty box, Obinna pulled out something strange. A hidden stash of books and magazines, the kind no child should ever read. Their covers flashed with images and words they did not understand but could not resist staring at. "What is this?" Adiz whispered, her small hand trembling as she flipped through a page. Obinna's eyes widened. I think they are for adults. My father used to hide them here before he died." The room fell silent except for the drops of rain on the corrugated roof. Their eyes scanned the pages, unsure, confused, curious. A strange stirring filled the air, something too heavy for children their age, something dangerous. That evening, nothing seemed wrong. Obinna's mother chopped vegetables in her kitchen while Adiz's mother sang softly to herself. But upstairs in that small room, something unspoken had already shifted. At first, the children only peeked out of curiosity, whispering and laughing nervously. But in the days that followed, whenever the mothers left for the market, they would return to those books. Each page pulled them deeper into a world their minds were not ready for. Innocence slowly eroded, curiosity turned into imitation. The once lively compound grew quiet. The cheerful banter between the children changed to secrecy. They spent more time inside a locked room. And yet, the mothers, exhausted from market struggles, hardly noticed the difference. Weeks later, their secret crossed a line. One afternoon, Obinna looked at Adiz and asked in a low tone, "Should we try what we read?" Adiz hesitated, worry flashing in her eyes. But fear of being the boring one, fear of losing their bond, pushed her to whisper back, "Maybe, but nobody must know." The dice had been cast. Their first trial ended in confusion, shame, and silence. Adiz cried alone in her room for days, avoiding Obinna at all costs. He felt guilty, restless, like a heavy stone pressed against his chest. At night, he replayed everything in his mind, unable to clear the images from his head. But children, still untrained in self-control, are easily swayed. Curiosity kept pulling them back. They whispered, they planned, and time after time, they crossed boundaries they could not even fully understand. A secret they thought they were managing had already started eating away at their souls. And then, one fateful Sunday afternoon, while their mothers were at a community women's meeting, the children made another plan behind the locked door. They whispered, they fumbled, they tried. But just as they lost themselves in the secret world they thought was hidden forever, a knock came at the door. Obinna froze. Adiz's eyes widened in terror. "Obinna, why is this door locked?" It was his mother's stern voice. That sound was not just a knock. It was the beginning of a storm that would change two families forever. The pounding on the door did not stop. "Obinna!" Mrs. Amaka's voice carried that dangerous sharpness children recognized instantly. The kind of tone that made your bones rattle even before the punishment came. The children's hearts raced. Adiz quickly straightened her dress, her face pale and trembling. Obinna shoved the magazines back into the box with shaky hands, his fingers fumbling like dry leaves in harmattan wind. "Open this door right now." Their breaths caught. There was no escape. Obinna slowly turned the key, and the wooden door creaked open. His mother stood there, rain still dripping from her wrapper. Behind her, Mrs. Funk emerged, balancing a tray of oranges she had brought from the market. The mothers stepped in. The room reeked of nervous sweat. Their eyes swept across the mess, the opened box, the scattered papers, Adiz's flushed face, Obinna's trembling hands. There was a silence so deep, you could hear the pattering rain outside. Mrs. Amaka's gaze narrowed. "What is going on here?" Her words cut the air like a blade. Neither child moved. Neither spoke. The silence screamed louder than words. Mrs. Funk stepped forward, gently picking up one of the half-hidden magazines. Her eyes widened. She dropped it instantly, as though it had burned her fingers. "Jesus Christ!" she exclaimed, covering her mouth. At that moment, Obinna's eyes welled up, and the secret, heavy for weeks, finally burst. He fell to his knees and sobbed. Words tumbled out between his gasps. "We didn't mean to, we found them. I thought it was nothing but then." Adiz broke down too, her small hands covering her face. "Please, Mama. We didn't know it was wrong. We just. Her voice dissolved into shameful sobs. The weight of the revelation crashed onto the mothers. They stared at their children, not with simple anger, but with horror, with disbelief, with pain so raw it stabbed their throats. Slowly, Mrs. Amaka sat on the bed, her hands trembling. Her face turned ghostly pale as she whispered to herself, "So this is what has been happening under my roof? In my own house?" Mrs. Funk looked from her daughter to her best friend, her orange tray clattering to the floor. "Amaka, how did we not see this? How?" The realization pricked both mothers deeply. They had been so consumed with their daily hustle at the market, carrying the burden of feeding their homes, that they had not looked into the quieter corners of their children's lives. Mrs. Amaka finally spoke, her voice hoarse. "Obinna, is this what you have been doing? Is this how you repay me for all my suffering?" The boy shook his head violently through his tears. "No, Mama. Please. I didn't know. I thought it was just pictures. I thought." Shame drowned his voice. The room thickened with pain. Outside, the compound that once rang with laughter now echoed with sorrow. But through the fire of grief, something remarkable happened. Neither woman raised a hand, neither shouted insults, neither reached for a cane. For deep down, they knew the damage done was not one that punishment could undo. Instead, Mrs. Funk slowly went to sit beside her daughter. She drew Adiz into her arms, ignoring the mess on the floor. Her voice was trembling but firm. "My child, hear me well. There are things your eyes should not yet see, things your heart should not yet know. Curiosity has carried you where you are not meant to go. But you are not lost. What matters now is that we help you find the way back." Mrs. Amaka placed a hand on Obinna's head, though her whole body shook. "My son, I have failed you. I should have looked closer. I should have spoken earlier. But no more silence. This ends today." The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that brewed within those walls. But it was the beginning of healing, the kind of healing that starts only after wounds are laid bare. That night, the two mothers sat together long after the children had fallen asleep, the rain long gone. Under the dim yellow bulb of the sitting room, they spoke with voices heavy with regret. "We cannot undo what has been seen," Mrs. Amaka whispered. "But we can decide what happens next." Mrs. Funk nodded solemnly. "If we pretend it never happened, the silence will destroy them. We need to act. Real help. Real guidance. Before curiosity destroys their future." And so, the two neighbors who had laughed together, cooked jollof together, and comforted each other through tears, now made a new pact. Not just as friends, but as mothers bound by one painful discovery. They would fight for their children, however hard it would be. They would not beat them into silence. They would not let shame swallow them whole. They would search for help, even if it meant confronting their own guilt. It was a decision made in whispers that night. A decision that would carry them into a long and difficult journey, one filled with tears, with battles against stigma, with secrets laid bare in therapy sessions they never thought they'd attend. But for now, the compound lay quiet. The children, restless in their sleep, murmured apologies even in dreams. And outside, the first fragile chirp of a morning bird rose into the sky, as though promising a new chapter had begun. What none of them knew yet was that the road to healing would soon expose even deeper cracks in their families than this one night revealed. Morning in Owerri usually came with the sounds of broomsticks sweeping compounds, hawkers calling out their wares, and the restless traffic of kiki riders honking along dusty roads. But in the compound of Mrs. Amaka and Mrs. Funk, the air was unusually heavy. Obinna and Adiz sat at opposite corners, avoiding each other's eyes. Their laughter, once the heartbeat of the neighborhood, was gone. The silence was so loud that even the neighbors noticed. "Obinna, why are you no longer playing football in the evenings?" one of the boys from the street asked. But Obinna only shook his head and walked away. That morning, Mrs. Amaka tied her wrapper tightly, determination etched into every line on her face. She called Obinna to sit before her and looked straight into his tear-filled eyes. "My son, listen to me," she began. "If a child goes into the bush without guidance, he may find palm fruits, but he may also meet a snake. That is what has happened to you and Adiz. You opened something you were not old enough to understand, and it tried to trap you. But thank God we found it early." Obinna swallowed hard, his small hands fiddling with the edge of his chair. Across the yard, Adiz sat with her mother. Mrs. Funk's usually soft tone had hardened. "Adiz, my daughter, do you see how one secret can carry shame into a whole house? People say love means blind trust, but love without guidance can destroy a child. From today, no more locked doors, no more secrets. You hear me?" Adiz nodded quietly, tears sliding down her cheek. But words were not enough. The mothers knew it. Something deeper had to change. Something more structured. That evening, both women sat together under the mango tree in the center of the compound. A small lantern burned between them, casting faint yellow light as mosquitoes hummed around. "We cannot handle this alone," Mrs. Funk whispered. "If we keep everything inside, the children will grow only in confusion. We need professional help. Someone who can explain, someone who can guide." Mrs. Amaka hesitated. In her heart, pride whispered, "Is it not shameful to expose family secrets? What will people say when they hear your son and your friend's daughter have fallen into this kind of mistake? But she shook her head violently. "No, I will not let shame kill my child. I will not. Tomorrow we start looking for help." The decision was made. The next week was full of storms. The mothers discovered quickly that finding the right help was not easy. Some people they approached laughed them off. "Children? The 12? Just flog them very well, they will forget," one man said. Others whispered advice behind their backs, mocking their so-called failure as mothers. One market woman sneered at Mrs. Funk, saying, "If you trained your daughter well, she will never follow boy to that extent." The weight of gossip pressed on them like iron chains. But the mothers refused to yield. At last, with persistence, they found an NGO in town that offered counseling for children. It wasn't easy. Walking into the office, they felt their hearts racing, ashamed yet desperate for healing. The counselor, a stern but kind woman named Mrs. Florence, listened quietly as the two explained, their voices trembling with shame, guilt, and fear. She nodded slowly after hearing them out. "You came to the right place," she said softly. "You must understand, what your children stumbled into is not uncommon. Curiosity is natural in children. But without guidance, it becomes dangerous. The problem is not only with Obinna and Adiz. It is also with you. Both of you mothers must rebuild trust, communication, and boundaries. Otherwise, this wound will fester." The words slapped them like cold water. They had come hoping for a quick fix for their children, only to discover they too had to change. The sessions began. awkward at first, with the children barely speaking. Obina's head drooped so low it was almost touching his chest. Adi's eyes stayed fixed on her lap. But slowly, week after week, the tension began to break. Through gentle questions, Mrs. Florence made them talk. About curiosity, about shame, about why they hid everything from their mothers. "Because we thought you would shout at us," Adiz admitted in a small voice. "We thought you would beat us if you knew." The words stung. Mrs. Funk's lips trembled as she realized her daughter had mistaken her leniency for blindness and her silence for love. Obina's confession was worse. "I didn't want Mama to think I was bad, so I locked the door. But hiding didn't stop the pictures, they stayed in my head." Mrs. Amaka reached for him, crying openly now. "My son, it is me who failed you. You are not bad. You are only a child that needed more light where I left you in the dark." Healing was slow, but it began. Arguments turned to conversations. Secrecy started losing its grip. Yet all was not well just yet. Secrets have a way of leaving shadows behind. One evening, weeks into therapy, Adiz walked up to Obina. Her face was nervous, her words dangerous. Do you ever think about it still?" she whispered. Obina stiffened, staring at her. The truth rose in his throat. Yes, he still remembered everything. But now he also remembered the shame, the tears, his mother's broken voice. Adiz bit her lip. "Sometimes I still feel curious. Don't you?" The question hung in the air like a poisoned arrow. Their mothers believed the healing had begun, that the silence had been broken. But in truth, the battle inside the children's hearts was still raging. Healing had begun on the outside, but temptation still whispered from the shadows within. And soon, it would test them both again in a way no counseling session had prepared them for. The compound in Owerri seemed alive again. At least on the surface. Children's laughter floated occasionally across the yard, the chatter of market women carried in the breeze, and Obina once more joined his friends for football in the evenings. Adiz started humming songs from Sunday school again, soft little tunes that suggested things were back to normal. But still, when the laughter ended and the compound fell silent, the shadows returned. At night, while lying awake on his thin mattress, Obina's mind betrayed him. The images from those pages whispered back, pushing against the doors of the lessons he was trying hard to learn. He turned and turned under his blanket, his chest heavy. On the other side of the wall, Adiz experienced the same. The counseling sessions had given them language, yes, but temptation remained a restless visitor. Sometimes during class, when she should have been writing notes, her thoughts drifted to things she didn't understand but remembered all too well. It came to a head one dull Saturday afternoon. The sun beat harshly on the zinc roofs, and most of the neighbors slumped in their houses, too tired to chatter. Mrs. Amaka and Mrs. Funk were away again, this time at a women's cooperative meeting that would last hours. Obina sat on the edge of his bed, trying desperately to bury his nose in his homework. But the silence of the compound pressed around him. Then came the knock. "Obina?" Adiz's voice, small, hesitant, his heart skipped. He opened the door slowly, and there she stood, not smiling, not playful, but with an uncertainty that mirrored his own. "Why are you here?" he asked softly. She hesitated, her eyes falling to her feet. I feel like talking. I can't stop remembering. And it's too heavy to carry all by myself." Those words pierced him because they told the truth of his own mind. He nodded quietly and let her in. For a while they just sat. The clock ticked. A goat bleated outside near the fence. Neither spoke. Then Adiz whispered, "Do you ever still want to read those books again?" Obina's chest tightened. He looked at her quickly, then away. This was the very question that haunted him in his lonely nights. His lips shook. "I think of it sometimes," he admitted in trembling honesty. Her eyes searched his. "Me too. But what if?" She couldn't finish. The silence between them stretched dangerously. And in that dangerous silence, curiosity knocked again. "Maybe just one last time?" Adiz whispered, her words fragile, her shame heavy. Obina's mind battled fiercely. On one hand, he could already imagine the crushing tears if they fell again. On the other, temptation tugged with a power that didn't care about consequences. He rubbed his sweaty palms against each other. As if on cue, his eyes darted to the wooden box at the corner of the room, the box that once held the books. His heart pounded wildly. He had thrown most away under his mother's order, but he had secretly kept one, hidden deep beneath old clothes. The urge to bring it out throbbed in his chest. But just as his hand twitched toward the box, an image burst into his mind. His mother, crying in that very spot, her voice shaking as she said, "You are not bad. You are only a child that needed more light where I left you in the dark." The shame struck him so hard he froze. His hand pulled back. He looked at Adiz, whose eyes already burned with curiosity and hesitation. "No," he said suddenly, his voice trembling but firm. "We can't keep doing this." Adiz's face broke with mixed emotion, frustration, relief, confusion. "But what do we do with these feelings then? How do we stop them?" It was the hardest question of all. At that exact moment, they heard footsteps outside. Heavy, approaching, familiar. Adiz's eyes widened in terror. "Your mother," she gasped. But no, it wasn't. Obina recognized the sound. It was their neighbor, Mr. Chaik, a nosy man known for poking into people's business. His habit of checking on the children when their mothers were gone had always annoyed them. Today, it would accidentally save them. "Obina," he called from outside the door. "Come and help me push my wheelbarrow, it got stuck in the mud." The children exchanged a glance of panic and relief. Quickly, Adiz dashed up, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. "I have to go." Without waiting, she slipped out before the knock could come. Obina stood frozen in the middle of the room, sweat dripping down his back, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had been seconds away from opening that box again. But he hadn't. That night, as he lay on his bed, he whispered a prayer to himself. Not the kind his pastor shouted in church, but a desperate child's prayer. "God, please, please help me do better than this. Please." His small voice cracked in the dark, but it was heard nonetheless. Meanwhile, in her mother's house, Adiz wept quietly into her pillow, ashamed of herself, ashamed of her desires, but also quietly grateful they had been stopped before crossing the line again. Neither of them knew it yet, but this near mistake would mark a turning point in their journey. Because the next day, their mothers, unknowingly guided by Providence, would set rules so strong, so unshakable, that the children's paths would be forever redirected. But those rules would not arrive gently. They would come in a storm. Sunday morning rose golden and quiet. The compound smelled of fried akra and pap, sounds of radios drifted from the neighbors' windows, and church bells rang faintly in the distance. To outsiders, everything looked normal. But inside the hearts of Mrs. Amaka and Mrs. Funk, something was brewing. They had both returned late from the women's meeting the previous night feeling uneasy. A strange heaviness lingered in their spirits, as though God himself had whispered, "Don't sleep too deeply, your children still need guarding." They spent the night restless, thinking of the past months, the therapy sessions, the confessions, the half-healed wounds. By mid-morning, they could not hold it anymore. Mrs. Amaka sent for Obina. Mrs. Funk called Adiz. The two children stood together in the center of the compound, their hands clasping each other nervously. The mothers faced them with grim determination on their faces. "From today forward," Mrs. Amaka began, "things in this house will not remain the same. Love is not silence. Love is rules. If not, the river will carry the canoe away before you know it." Adiz shifted uncomfortably beside Obina. Mrs. Funk lifted her chin. "We have tried to guide you gently, we have taken you for counseling, we have prayed with you. But we realize we cannot only speak. We must also set boundaries so that no temptation has room to enter. These rules are for your safety, even if you don't like them." Obina and Adiz exchanged worried glances. Mrs. Amaka raised her hand, her voice sharp like church bells. "Number 1. No door in this compound will be locked unless an adult is inside. If we ever find a door locked again, you will wish it had never been locked." The children nodded quickly. "Number 2. Mrs. Funk followed, her voice firm like never before. "No reading of books or magazines unless we have approved them. The world carries dangerous knowledge, knowledge that destroys instead of builds. You will read only what we give you. Their lips tightened, but again they nodded. Number 3, Mrs. Amaka continued, you must share your daily struggles with us. We are your mothers, not your enemies. If your mind tempts you, if darkness whispers to you, you will speak. Silence is the enemy that nearly destroyed you. And finally, Mrs. Funk concluded, her voice softening, there will be time every evening when we sit as families and talk. Not about work, not about food, but about you, your thoughts, your dreams, your fears. We will learn to speak again until conversation becomes natural between us. The air felt charged, like thunder waiting to break. Obinna's chest tightened. He wanted to protest, to shout that the rules were too much, that they were being treated like prisoners. But deep down, another voice whispered, they are doing this for you. Adiz chewed her lip, tears welling. It felt like her freedom was being taken away. But another part of her, a quieter, deeper part, felt strangely relieved. The temptation that lurked inside her no longer had room in silence. Later that evening, the families gathered again under the mango tree with the small lantern burning at the base. It felt different from every other evening. There was a seriousness in the air, but also something new, a fragile kind of hope. They talked, slowly at first, uncomfortably, but eventually, the children began to speak. Obinna told his mother about the nights he stayed up restless, haunted by the images he had once seen. Adiz admitted that sometimes memories still rose at school when she least wanted them to. The mothers listened, not with anger, not with curses, but with attention. You have spoken, Mrs. Funk said finally, and by speaking, you have already taken back power from silence. Secrets lose their grip when they are brought into the light. The words sank deep. For the first time, Obinna felt a glimmer of peace. But peace never arrives without testing. The very next week, when everyone thought progress was finally steady, a tragedy from outside the compound arrived like a sudden flood, threatening to undo all they had started rebuilding. One evening, as the compound was beginning to settle into the comfort of rules and structure, news came from the market. A fight, a theft, and then a stabbing. A young boy, not much older than Obinna, had been caught stealing money from a trader's stall. When apprehended, he confessed that it wasn't just hunger that drove him, but shame and secrets inside his home. The boy's story spread quickly through the marketplace like wildfire, neighbors whispering about how children of these days had lost their way. When Mrs. Amaka heard the details that evening, her heart shook violently. "Funk," she whispered to her friend, gripping her wrapper tightly, "if a little silence in our own house almost destroyed our children, what more the ones whose parents never even asked them a single question? That boy is not different from ours. His path could so easily have been Obinna's." The reminder was chilling. At that moment, the mothers realized, yes, they had caught their children just before it was too late. But the world was full of traps waiting right outside the gates. If they weren't careful, the children might still stumble into another shadow. The rules were not enough. The conversations were not enough. They would have to fight every single day, not just against temptation, but against a world ready to swallow their children whole the moment their backs were turned. And soon, they would discover that the real test was not what happened behind closed doors, but what happened when their children stepped into the wider world where their watchful eyes could not follow. The storm had only just begun. Weeks passed, and the compound regained some of its music. The sound of Obinna's laughter returned here and there, Adiz's humming filtered through the air again, and neighbors began to whisper, "Funk and Amaka's children are themselves again." But the mothers knew better. They had learned the hard way that shadows rarely vanish quickly. Shadows wait. And the deepest shadows often stalk in places outside the home. It was a Thursday afternoon at Central Primary School. The sun beat hot against the classroom windows, hawkers outside shouted boldly, and students chattered as the final bell rang. Bags swung onto shoulders, shoes scraped dust, and children poured out of classrooms. As Obinna walked out with his books hugged tightly to his chest, a group of older boys waved him over. They looked like trouble, shirt collars loose, socks rolled carelessly, one with a scar above his brow. Obinna, Where you day rush go like small Pekin? One sneered. I'm going home, he replied nervously. But one boy stepped closer, pulling something from his pocket. See this, he whispered. It was a small folded picture, obscene and hidden away from teacher's eyes. You want to see the real thing? Not like the fake books. Obinna's stomach nodded. His palms began to sweat. The boys laughed as he shifted uncomfortably. Nah, small one nah, the scarred boy teased. We get plenty like this. Don't form holy boy here. You think we don't know you? You already done am with that your compound friend. The word struck like thunder. Obinna froze, his blood running cold. How did they know? The truth was, they didn't. They were only mocking, guessing, laughing at him like older boys do. But guilt has a way of sharpening every word, turning it into a dagger. Obinna's face went pale. He shoved his way past, shaking his head. Leave me. I don't want. His voice cracked. The boys howled with laughter. You see em? The boy donned fear. But Obinna wasn't listening. His footsteps thundered against the school pavement as he rushed out the gate, refusing to look back. That evening, his mother noticed his silence. What is it again, my son? She asked. He opened his mouth, but shame swallowed the words. How could he explain that temptation had found him at school too? How could he admit that the ghosts of curiosity still haunted his steps? So he said nothing, staring quietly into his plate until his mother sighed and let him be. Across the compound, Adiz faced her own test. One afternoon, after choir practice at church, she lingered near the backyard with a group of girls. They giggled and whispered like children do, but then one girl leaned close and slyly asked, Adiz, we hear you and that boy next door are too close. Is it true? Adiz's heart thudded painfully. She felt her cheeks burn. And no, she protested too quickly. The girls laughed mischievously, poking her arm. Don't lie. Everybody notices. Always together, always whispering. If he is your boyfriend, just say it. The word boyfriend made her choke. She wasn't sure what that word truly meant yet, but something inside her quaked. The laughter of her friends dug at her like nails. She ran home, angry, ashamed, confused. That night, she cried into her pillow, not because of her friends' words but because the weakness from before still tormented her. If they only knew everything, they would never even play with her again. The children were now fighting two battles, one inside themselves and one outside in the world where temptation and gossip waited at every corner. But the mothers were not blind. They saw the weariness in their children's eyes. They noticed the trembling hands. They didn't know the full stories yet, but they knew the struggle was still alive. One evening, Mrs. Funk spoke in frustration under the mango tree. Amaka, we cannot be everywhere at once. Outside this compound, they face battles we cannot even imagine. How do we protect them then? Mrs. Amaka leaned forward, her voice grim. By equipping them. By giving them what cannot be taken away. The courage to say no, the voice to speak when they are scared, the wisdom to choose right even when no one is watching. We cannot guard their steps every time, but we can guard their hearts. So began a new effort. This time, the mothers did not just set rules, they armed their children with knowledge. They taught them about dangers hidden in peer pressure, about the importance of walking away quickly when temptation whispered. They spoke not only of obedience to parents but accountability to God, to themselves, and to community. Although the children squirmed at the seriousness of it all, deep down, something in them began to strengthen. The truth was painful, but it was also liberating. Though the shadows did not retreat fully. For though Obinna and Adiz were slowly finding courage, the world had one last cruel twist in store. An incident that would test everything they had learned, a fire trial that would reveal whether their mother's fight had been enough. And when it came, it would come suddenly, threatening to destroy them once again in front of the entire community. The morning it happened, the compound was unusually lively. A community meeting was being held in front of the local chief's house just down the road, and nearly every adult was in attendance. For once, the compound was mostly filled with youths and children, their laughter echoing freely as parents got caught up in speeches about sanitation and market dues. Obinna and Adiz, though less restless than before, still carried the weight of being different since their secret. Though their mothers had worked hard to shield them, the whispers from neighbors traveled like harmattan dust. Children overheard their parents and repeated ugly rumors at school. Shame clung to them like a stubborn stain. That afternoon, as most adults remained at the chief's house debating, a group of older boys swaggered into the compound. The same crowd that had teased Obinna before. They carried with them the cruel energy of idleness. "Obinna," one of them shouted, waving a ragged notebook. "See what we get here. Real pictures. If you really be small man, prove it today." A crowd of neighborhood children gathered quickly, hungry for drama. Curious eyes turned toward Obinna and Adiz. Someone whispered, "They said those two already know things they shouldn't," and a ripple of laughter followed. Obinna's chest went tight. Adiz felt her legs trembling. The older boys pressed closer, shoving the book toward them. "Just look at it. Nothing. Show your girl that you're brave." At that moment, time seemed to freeze. It was the very temptation, returned in broad daylight, this time with an audience. Faces leaned in, ready to mock, ready to gossip, ready to confirm every rumor. If Obinna reached out for that book, it would be over, not just privately this time, but publicly, before the very eyes of the community. His hand shook. He felt the weight of every session with Mrs. Florence, every tear cried with his mother, every word said under that mango tree. Was all of it meaningless now? Adiz's small voice cut the silence. "No, we don't want. Leave us alone." The boldness in her words shocked everyone, including Obinna. The boys erupted into laughter. "See? Fear. You two-day form holy now? After everything we hear?" But then Obinna lifted his chin. His voice was trembling, but it was steady enough. "It doesn't matter what you heard. I'm not looking. I won't. Do what you like." Gasps filled the compound. Some of the younger children actually clapped nervously, unsure if it was admiration or just relief. The older boys sneered, but they had been disarmed. They muttered a few insults, spat on the ground, and swaggered out. For the first time, Obinna and Adiz felt something stronger than shame, freedom. Not because the temptation was gone, but because they had finally spoken against it. Not in the safety of a closed room, not in therapy, but in the open, with everyone watching. When their mothers returned from the community meeting, the news had already spread. Neighbors relayed the drama with the usual spices, exaggerating details as Africans often do, but one truth stood out. The children had said no. That evening, under the mango tree, families gathered again. The little lantern burned, the shadows danced on their faces. But the tears in the mother's eyes this time were not from pain, they were from relief. Mrs. Amaka squeezed her son's shoulder. "Obinna, today you became truly my pride. Not because you never fell, but because you found the strength to rise." Mrs. Funk embraced her daughter tightly. "Adiz, you showed courage I pray every child can learn. Sometimes, saying no is harder than beating an enemy. But you stood tall." Around them, the compound breathed lighter. Other mothers, who had once mocked, now whispered to each other, perhaps these two women were right. Perhaps parenting is more than feeding and flogging. Perhaps it is watching, guiding, talking, listening. And indeed, it became a lesson not just for their family, but for others. Rumors turned into reflections. Gossip transformed into quiet respect. The incident under the chief's gate spread further than the shame ever had. People saw that a battle once hidden in shadows could be fought openly, and won. Life in the compound returned to something new. Not the old innocence, it could never fully return, but a maturity carved from struggle, guided by truth. Obinna and Adiz laughed again, this time with the patience of children who knew scars but also knew healing. Their friendship remained, but it was careful, respectful, tested by fire. And the mothers? They did not boast. They did not parade triumph. They knew the fight was ongoing. But their hearts were steady, their eyes finally open. They became women who reminded everyone that parenting in this age was not about buying gifts or ignoring whispers. It was about vigilance, honesty, and love that sets boundaries. This story leaves behind one truth. Not every parent is truly responsible. Some think providing food and shelter is enough. Some think silence and leniency is love. Some think punishment alone will save. But a responsible parent fights for attention, for time, for guidance, for constant conversation. Because one small secret, one small silence, can change everything. Now, the question is yours. Look around your home, your street, your community. Are you really watching? Do your children trust you enough to speak? Or will you wait until silence swallows them whole? Tell us in the comments, what do you think is the hardest part of being a responsible parent today? Is it time? Is it money? Or is it finding the courage to speak openly with your children? Let's talk about it. Your words may save another family.